In this video, I'm going to go through the Food Literacy Skills Examination booklet for CBA 2 brief number 1, the sustainability one. The other two booklets are laid out in a similar fashion. So the same procedure will be done where the gaps or the sections you have to write under are laid out for you. Unless you've got a valid reason verified by a parent and an email sent to me, you will need to print out the booklet and fill it in by hand and post it into the school. This will be due after the midterm break. So here is the brief. Sustainable and responsible living involves making choices and developing practices that are eco-friendly. Carry out research on sustainable practices in the selection and management of food. Demonstrate your culinary and creative skills by preparing, cooking and serving a nutritious lunch. Prepare and serve a suitable accompaniment. Dishes should illustrate sustainable practices you have researched. Complete a written evaluation and refer to the finished dishes, how you met the criteria set out in the brief, and your overall performance in the food literacy examination. The brief is wide open for interpretation. The main thing is that you would show practices. These are daily things that you would do, for example, using up leftovers, and you would integrate these practices into your choice of a nutritious lunch. And note that it is a nutritious lunch. In other words, it must contain at least 3, if not 4, of the healthy food pyramid groups. So breaking down the assignment, the research is on the selection and management of food, your sustainable practices in your choice and selection of food. Look there, it says demonstrate your culinary and creative skills. So you need to show culinary skill. You need to show creative skill. And along with your nutritious lunch, you're also going to have to prepare and serve a suitable accompaniment. Now, it doesn't say that that has to be actually cooked. Okay, so it could be something like a salad. Now, your dishes should illustrate your sustainable practices that you have researched and highlighted as being the most important in your research. Remember that you've got to do up the written work before you cook the actual item. And after you cook the item, then you will write up your written evaluation. And that is what will be posted to me. The entire research and the evaluation of the finished dish, all written up within that booklet template. And remember, because I've also given you a Word document, you can extend any section and make them bigger. But you don't want to go on and on forever, but absolutely you can put in supplementary and extra pages to get into the higher band of grading, which we'll talk about later. So what's important is that your research does need to follow the design process or the design brief. In the template, you're given space to define what the brief is. The brief is what's in the pink box. That is the brief, full stop. Everything in the pink box is what you've been asked by the Department of Education what to do. Then you've got the analysis of the task. And that's just breaking down that brief in the pink box into smaller, shorter sentences so you can identify the steps that you need to take. The factors that you need to consider should be relevant to the brief. So if I was doing it, it would be my culinary skills, sustainable practices that I've identified as being the most important. There's an example of 2 relevant factors that you could include. Then you will be researching, investigating and generating ideas. You'll do that by referring to cookbooks, considering what we've already cooked in class, searching BBC Good Food online, looking through any easy food magazines that you have at home. You develop your possible solutions, putting forward your ideas and identify the pros and cons of each choice. It's really important that you run your ideas by one or two of your peers for feedback. This will have to be evidenced, as in, I will need, that person's name being mentioned, and perhaps a written piece by that peer given to you and then slotted into your work. Evidence of peer feedback is extremely important for the recording of the marks. So first of all, you're asked to define the brief. I have been asked to consider sustainable and responsible living. I have been asked to consider the choices and practices that are eco-friendly in order to live a sustainable and responsible life. I have been asked to carry out research on sustainable practices in the selection and management of food. If you read the actual brief in the pink box and listen to what I just said, you'll see that I've simply restated the brief in the pink box in my own words, breaking it down into short sentences. This is the section in which you demonstrate that you understand what the brief is, that you understand what has been asked of you to do. For example, I have been asked to demonstrate my culinary and creative skills. I have been asked to demonstrate my culinary and creative skills by preparing, cooking, and serving a lunch. I have been asked to make a nutritious lunch. So by reading the brief carefully, you could in fact break down at least 7 different things that you've been asked to do, and this is where you would record it. Another example would be, I have been asked to prepare a suitable accompaniment. I have been asked to serve a suitable accompaniment. Break it down into as simple sentences as you wish, but do have 7 points. So I'd ask you to look at your brief now and to identify what those points would be. Another example would be, I have been asked to illustrate the sustainable practices that I've researched in my choice of the dish. I have been asked to complete a written evaluation of the finished dishes. So to end this slide, demonstrate that you understand the brief by defining it in short, simple, and easy to understand sentences which refer to the brief. The first part of the analysis is to look at the opening sentence. So the first line of the brief says, sustainable and responsible living involves making choices and developing practices that are eco-friendly. So obviously you would think what you already know. What would a list of eco-friendly choices be? You would refer to your textbook, you would do a Google search, you would refer to any magazine or newspaper clippings that you have. The Irish Times does a good one change column in the magazine every weekend about an environmental change or choice that you could make. So you could even Google the Irish Times, the one change column. So you're going to list the list of eco-friendly choices to begin with, of what you know already. Start with that. Then you have to go into much more specifics by carrying out the research on the sustainable practices in the selection and management of food. So this is all going to be discussed in relation to the buying of food. That's the selection of food. The choosing the food in the shop. You know, which food you choose over another. Like, will you buy meat or will you buy tofu or eggs? Okay, so that's the selection. It's the actual shopping and the choice. And the management of food is, preventing it from going off, using foods in rotation in the fridge. In other words, bring the foods that need to be used up first to the fore of the fridge and put the newer things at the back, so everything moves in rotation. So while I've given you some ideas about what you could talk about for the sustainable practices, you will have to do some research. Let's take, say if you're researching cheese, for example. You could talk about using up the rinds of the cheese, putting them into a bolognese to give it flavour, for example. Using the example of cheese, you could also state that you should not buy too much. The best way to avoid wasting good cheese is to buy just what you need, and you don't need much of it. You might discover in your research that you shouldn't wrap cheese in cling film. because it's single-use plastic, but it's also the worst material that you can use to store cheese because cheese wants to breathe and cling film prevents that. Cheese can be frozen if it's grated, if there's leftover grated cheese. So that's just an example of one food ingredient, cheese, and talking about the sustainable practices in the relation to the selection and management of cheese. That's how you're going to come up with the points for your research. Think about the individual foods and go from there. The factors that you need to consider need to be specific to the task. In other words, you want to research practices that are eco-friendly. You don't want to bring in extra points that don't have anything to do with the brief. Your factors need to be specific to the brief. You may consider individual factors, for example, the amount of time that has been given to you to finish this CBA, your age, your stage, your previous experience. That is all relevant because you're the one making it. The idea of researching is to go beyond what you know already. But first of all, to research, you need to know what you do know already. So it is good practice to write down the first ideas that come to your mind. And then when you look into those different ideas and dishes and so on, you might get variations and different types of recipes or ingredients that you might not have considered using before that could change the recipe, alter it in a certain way to make it fit in with a more sustainable lifestyle and sustainable practices within the home. So do take note of what you know already and go beyond that in your research. Because there are marks going for extending yourself beyond your current knowledge, you must investigate, you must research. It is not acceptable to say, my mum always makes this recipe, or this is my granny's recipe. No. Go beyond what you know already. That is the purpose of the CBA. It's to demonstrate adventurousness. Show your adventurousness. Show your interest. Show that you're willing to go out of your comfort zone. Remember, it's only food, okay? So if you make something and it doesn't work out, it's only food. You need to show that you're going into new territory. You're going beyond your current knowledge. Based on the research you make at the very beginning, choose what you consider to be suitable dishes and make sure you've got a source of the recipe, a website link or a cookbook and author's name. Choosing a suitable accompaniment will be based on the nutritional value of the main course. So if you're having pasta carbonara, for example, right? A side of garlic bread isn't going to make nutritional sense because it's too much carbohydrates. Whereas a side salad with some nuts and seeds and fruits and so on in it will make more sense from a nutritional balance perspective. So you need to state what your recipe is and give examples of the suitable accompaniments that complement the nutritional aspects of the dish you've chosen. After weighing up the pros and cons of the dishes that you've researched, discussing this with your peers and your family, you need to make your choice. You get marks for writing down, my choice is. You also get marks by identifying which accompaniment you've chosen will go best with your dish. You need to give reasons for your choice. So all of these boxes I've laid out on the template are all to maximise your marks. Don't leave any box unfilled out. If you do that, you are losing marks immediately. It's quite easy to go off track and to get carried away with a particular recipe because you simply like it or you just want to do it. If you want to do a recipe, just make it and get it out of your system. But don't put it down in your CBA unless it has sustainable practices that you've identified in your research. You can always go back to your research and add in sustainable practices to fit in with your recipe. That's absolutely good self-reflection. State what your nutritious lunch dish is. State the sustainable practice used. State what your accompaniment for your lunch dish is. State the sustainable practice you've used. This will prevent you from going off track, off point, and losing unnecessary marks. So Best of luck.